Hello, everyone. My name is Nisha Mody, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a feminist healing coach, writer, and librarian. Some of you may know me from my work at UCLA as a health and life sciences librarian, or as associate director from the network of the National Library of Medicine, Pacific Southwest region. Some of you may know me from We Here or the Medical Library Association, or you might not know me at all. But what you really might not know is that I've always been interested in relationships, why people are the way they are, and how we can all just get along, or at least understand each other. This took me on a journey of being an IT consultant, an IT recruiter, a voiceover coach, and then a speech therapist. And then it took me to my work in libraries. And while I'm proud of getting 2 master's degrees and serving and co-creating with so many people, what I'm most proud of is embarking on my own to support people in relationships with others and with themselves. And this is what brings me here today to talk about showing up, how to care for each other during messy times. And before we get into it, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. I live on a land once known as Tovangar. It was the home of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples, who were the stewards of this land before it was settled. Tovangar was occupied and colonized by Spain in the 1700s, and then by Mexico in the 1800s. In 1846, the United States declared war on Mexico in order to take possession of the Los Angeles region, California, and other lands in the West. I live within and amongst this complexity in a city that continues to evolve within the structures of capitalism. I will always have more to connect with and learn about this land. Now, when I was first asked to do the closing keynote, I was honored and humbled. But then when the keynotes were announced, I saw that Dr. Nicole Hannah-Jones and Dr. Stacy Patton were opening. Wow, was I shocked to be part of this lineup. The first thing I thought was, who am I? Who am I to follow up Dr. Hannah-Jones, the person who is a Pulitzer Prize winner and a MacArthur Fellow, the creator of the 1619 Project in the New York Times Magazine? Who am I to follow up Dr. Patton, who has written in numerous major news outlets and appeared on television for her reporting on child welfare, race relations, and higher education, and written multiple books advocating for Black children, and also founded organization Spare the Kids. It's not that I'm not proud of what I've done, but it's that I've been conditioned to not feel enough, especially in the achievement-oriented, hyper-independent culture I grew up in, and we all probably grew up in, as a result of colonialism, capitalism, and white supremacy. And then I had gratitude, not just that I could be here, but I was grateful to these incredible women and to the forum organizers for facilitating all of this stuff to come up for me. I was humbled because awareness and unlearning are values I hold dear to my heart. I bring all of this up in relation to the title and content of this talk, showing up, caring for each other during messy times. Because not only is it important for us to show up for each other, but we also have to show up for ourselves. And showing up for myself in this case was realizing how conditioned I was to make myself small, that I wasn't good enough or knowledgeable enough or written about enough to be here. But I am here. And the irony, or maybe connection, for what has helped and recognize and celebrate my enoughness is the support, care, and guidance from other people. I didn't get through the death of my father, shortly followed by my divorce, alone. I had support from my family, my friends, my work colleagues, and even acquaintances. My point is that as much as we celebrate people individually, it's critical to remember how this is not a solo or decontextualized act. As Audre Lorde said in June 1981, during a keynote presentation at the National Women's Studies Association Conference in Storrs, Connecticut, I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. And I am not free as long as one person of color remains chained, nor is any one of you. It is a statement of interdependence and liberation. It shows that liberation is collective and that we need each other. So showing up for each other is imperative to get through these messy times. Saying something doesn't affect us not only ignores interdependence, it is a betrayal to ourselves. And what are these messy times? Uncertainty and lack of physical safety due to COVID-19 has plagued already existing inequities inside and outside of libraries. Continuous murders of Black people by the police, a tense election, a political insurrection, multiple COVID variants preventing us from opening or feeling safe to be with others, social isolation, a significant increase in depression rates, missing and murdered Indigenous women, mass graves of Indigenous people being discovered, pipelines threatening water on Indigenous land, climate change, apartheid in Palestine, and a denial of responsibility in Afghanistan are just some of the things happening all at once, all while we decided whether or not to open libraries and schools, determine if people can continue to work from home, protecting children returning to school while they're unable to be vaccinated, and how to be anti-racist in libraries. Navigating this collective trauma is so incredibly messy. It was already messy before, and now we are faced with navigating all of it, or perhaps just finding ways to cope because of overwhelm. There obviously isn't one easy answer to this mess. However, I don't think it's about having the answer. I have always said that I think librarianship isn't so much about helping people find the answers, but asking different questions. So the question I have today is, how are you showing up? How are you showing up for yourself? How are you showing up for others? And how are you showing up for the land? Something I think a lot about, and I've already mentioned a few times, is interdependence. How is what I pull out of my fridge connected to a migrant farm worker who labors all day? How are my daily actions connected to others, many of whom I don't even know, and people I do know, and the land we live on, the land taken away from Indigenous peoples? I've created a way to look at showing up. This Venn diagram shows three aspects of showing up for yourself, showing up for others, and showing up for the land. What I'm going to mention isn't exhaustive, but it has some examples for how this can look. For showing up for yourself, this looks like taking a pause or breath, self-awareness and reflection, as well as personal responsibility and accountability. And by taking a pause, increasing your awareness, and knowing that you have a personal responsibility, you can allow yourself to slow down and ask, am I doing too much? What do I lose or miss when I do too much? What can I control here? What am I trying to make perfect? What is enough? Achieving perfection is something I struggle with, along with trying to have all the answers. I think it's important to know that as individuals and together, we are in process constantly. Are we attuning to the process or expecting a perfect outcome? Also, are you asking for help, truly? Showing up for yourself means that you can't do everything alone. To know that you have a limited capacity like everyone else. This can be asking for feedback if you're unsure of something, delegating a large project, asking for a listening ear, or just asking for a distraction. Asking for help isn't a flaw, it's human, and it's a way to connect with other humans, which is so good for your body and to show that you care about that relationship. For showing up for others, this can look like simply checking in and asking, hey, how have you been? Or I was thinking about you and I'm just checking in. It looks like being trauma-informed, which I'll talk about in a little bit. It looks like mutuality, where relationships are not tit for tat. They are contextual, and there is mutual recognition of caring for each other. And there's participating in accountability when it presents itself. And just like we can ask help for ourselves, we can offer help to others. And it's better if we can get specific with that help. Can I help you with the visioning for that project? I'd love to brainstorm about that instruction session with you. I know it can be tedious to schedule meetings for this. Can I help with that? I think sometimes we're afraid to offer help because we worry we might offer the wrong thing. We forget that the person we are asking can say no, or that we can say, I don't know if you'd like this, so let me know if you'd prefer something else. It's okay if someone says no. It's okay to say you don't know, because what you did is show up for them. And I feel like at the end of the day, that's what we remember. We remember who paid attention. And showing up for the land means awareness and action towards Indigenous erasure. It looks like giving land back and honoring treaties, which inherently means not extracting from the land. And for libraries and related organizations, there is a responsibility to care about this, especially when looking at the history and origin of collections and how knowledge is organized. It also looks like including Indigenous voices in decision-making, and especially from a digital perspective, considering the impact of broadband on the land. And then there are the intersections. Between showing up for yourself and others, there is solidarity. Between others and the land, showing up for each other, there is community. For the intersection of showing up for yourself and the land, there's sovereignty, which reminds me of a quote from Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Wisdom, and Teaching of Plants, where author Robin Wall Kimmerer writes, in some native languages, the term for plants translates to those who take care of us. And later she writes, knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and to protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. And then at the center of all of this is care and interdependence. There are so many ways we can show up when we think about this. It doesn't have to be extravagant, and you might already be doing some of these. And when you are even more intentional about it, it is even more palpable. Now, I'm not an expert on all of these concepts, but I do ask, are these conversations even happening within your organization at all levels? And I also wonder who is doing the work and who is getting the credit. Are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, getting credit? Something that was recently written about in a statement I co-authored with other incredible BIPOC librarians in WOC+Lib, titled Statement Against White Appropriation of Black, Indigenous, and People of Color's Labor. Is there a recognition that solidarity is often most visible at the worker and student level? Are you paying BIPOC equitably, especially when they have to do the EDI work on top of other existing duties? And is there active self-reflection, especially if you're privileged in terms of race, gender, ability, rank in the organization, and class? While all of what I've mentioned is important, what I've seen so much across all types of organizations is a call to action without reflection. And this really ends up being for optics, for performing anti-racism without doing the uncomfortable work of facing ourselves. Lately, I have been presenting talks, courses, and workshops around trauma-informed care and library work. And I always start with saying that being trauma-informed in libraries begins with being a trauma-informed human. Similar to how showing up starts the same way. How is showing up happening in your home and social circles, in addition to the workplace? I feel that trauma is often under-recognized and dismissed. We think, I don't have it as bad as other people. Yet that doesn't mean we aren't affected. And the first step toward being trauma-informed is being trauma-aware. Oftentimes, trauma is considered to be the traumatic event itself, but it is actually the effects from an event or a series of events that can have a long-lasting effect on all parts of your health. SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, provides this definition. Individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And it's critical to also see how trauma is as systemic as it is individual. In fact, systemic trauma from the isms often results in individual trauma. Trauma-informed care asks, what happened to you, as opposed to what's wrong with you? I'll be the first to admit that I've asked the latter when assessing someone else's behavior. During this collective trauma, combined with other trauma and stress people have experienced, especially at the margins, how are the decisions I make, we make, and you make a response to what happened to someone or a group of people, as opposed to a moral disposition often steeped in supremacy culture? Ignoring how our behaviors are responses to stress throughout our lives, not because we are quote unquote good or quote unquote bad. And how has what we've been taught as quote unquote good, especially being obedient and disregarding our personal needs, been harmful to ourselves and as a result, projected onto others? The 6 principles of trauma-informed care developed by SAMHSA are ones we can consider in all parts of our lives. And I think while it can be practiced at all levels, it is critical for leaders to embody these principles when reflecting, communicating, relating, and creating policy, essentially when showing up for organizations. And I'll be going through each of these. 1, safety; 2, trustworthiness and transparency; 3, peer support; 4, collaboration and mutuality; 5, empowerment, voice, and choice; and 6, cultural, historical, and gender issues. So first, safety. Safety is the absence of threat and the presence of connection. I'm going to repeat that. Safety is the absence of threat and the presence of connection. In the context of COVID, intersected with other messiness, all of which includes so much change and uncertainty, all of us have probably experienced a lack of safety with varying degrees during this time. And this is physical, emotional, and psychological safety. Sudden changes about what choices we do or don't have, and the choices other people can make that can potentially harm the public, is something very hard to sit with. Additionally, it's important to consider how safety has always been a concern to those with disabilities, those who are chronically ill, or have to be a caretaker for others in their home. So many of the quote unquote adjustments many of us made during this time are ones others have had to navigate much before us. Given how this disparity has presented itself more because of the pandemic, is why it's so important to unlearn and show up for those who have always dealt with this long before, who have always had fewer choices, who perpetually experience a lack of safety and security in a world that frequently marginalizes, invisibilizes, and simply does not accommodate those who cannot meet the productivity required by capitalism. Those who don't have the luxury to just return to work because they're asked. 2, trustworthiness and transparency. How much trust is gained or lost based on decisions that are being made, existing structures, and reinforcing these structures, whether it's intentional or not? How does transparency show honesty, humility, vulnerability, which are often the building blocks of trust? 3, peer support. How do you reach out to those who relate to you? Is there an effort to demonstrate the power of peer support? One example of this are the BIPOC and LAS mental health summits written about by Katrina Davis Kendrick, Amanda Lefwich, and Twana Hodge in CNRL News in their article, Providing Care and Community in Times of Crisis, the BIPOC and LAS mental health summits, where they discuss mental health related summits for BIPOC and LAS. They write, the summits generated critical and ongoing conversation about mental health and well-being in library workplaces and the LAS field in general, particularly as they relate and impact BIPOC workers. It continues, caring for the community takes action, and sometimes these actions move outside of regular systems. Providing space for those in need doesn't require the formal backing of an institution or funding. Only time and dedication and a desire to offer excellent information, resources, and good best practices to those we support Create and serve your community with intention and honesty without the need for perfection. Offer it and they will come. Peer support doesn't have to be within organizations, but as organizations, I think it's important to show up by speaking about its importance. 4, collaboration and mutuality. How are we all demonstrating our individual strengths and how they contribute to the bigger picture? Is this encouraged or embedded within review processes? Are you leading by example? This is the antithesis of individualism and defensiveness, 2 characteristics of white supremacy culture as discussed by Tema Okun. 5, empowerment, voice, and choice. Not having or offering choices is a hallmark of re-traumatization. Consent lives beyond sexual conduct. Having choices itself is empowering and gives everyone a voice and say in the modality that works best for them. It allows people to be seen and heard, something we all deserve. And of course, this is not the illusion of choice, but the possibility of choice. Cultural, historical, and gender issues is that conditioning I spoke of in the beginning. How does the conditioning from these factors and what is considered to be quote unquote normal lead to unlearning and dismantling what has been harmful and re-traumatizing? Additionally, this includes ability and accessibility, something crucial to consider during a time when illness, having to care for others, and disability have come to the forefront, though they have always been issues before things got messier. So this is a lot of information. And I invite you to pause for a second and take note of how you're feeling in your body. What's the temperature? Where do you feel tightness? Where do you feel loose? How does your breath feel in your body? If you had to use a color or metaphor to describe what you're feeling in your body, what would it be? If you can, drop any of that in the chat. I'll wait a bit for you to do that. While this isn't live, I think this is important to notice and share amongst yourselves. There's no judgment here. We're just seeing how we feel. While I'm not speaking live, I couldn't help myself from bringing a somatic body practice here. And I do this because it can often help to bring some ease to our bodies. It can give us information about our presence. It can connect us to our own bodies and to each other. And that is just one way of showing up, even if that means you don't have the capacity to do what I asked and you follow that instinct. In the field of information science, I think we often reference external information, as that's what the job often asks of us. Yet internal information in relation to the outside often provides more meaning than we might realize. And this makes me think about the forces that actually disconnect us from our body and how this extends to the land many of us have settled on, and some of you might be indigenous to. Colonization globally has changed the relationship humans have with the land through the economic system of capitalism. We feel this ownership of the land rather than a kinship. And this can result in losing sight of our bodies and focusing on doing things rather than being with. This actually reminds me of this painting I'm going to share with you right now. This painting is called America's Most Wanted by Komar and Melamed, made in 1994. They were avant-garde Russian-American artists who painted this based on answers from 1,001 Americans being asked what they really liked. The joy of landscape and complementary nature was universal. Yet there's an added element here of George Washington, which is honestly fascinating. It's like a creep of colonization that pervades our minds and the connection we intuitively feel with nature. I'm going to stop my share again. In colonization, capitalism, white supremacy, and all forms of supremacy, including hierarchy, make me think about a book I recently read called How We Show Up: Reclaiming Family, Friendship, and Community by Mia Birdsong. What I love most about this book is Birdsong's rejection of the bootstrap individualism of the American dream. She provides so many examples and stories about alternate structures where people showed up for each other, especially people who aren't part of the nuclear family model. And pretty much all of the examples of showing up that Mia speaks about are ones from the queer community, Black communities, Black women, and other families that do not fit the nuclear family model. She speaks about a community care group she co-created with called the Black Women's Freedom Circle. These are Sunday morning gatherings where a group of Black women join together and talk about what freedom means to them, amongst other topics. And in this space, care looks like not having expectations for what you should wear. It looks like everyone bringing food, everyone helping to clean up, and not choosing to come if you can. It looks like no one person really being the official host because everyone is part of the circle, helping out collaboratively. Birdsong writes, "Through these women, my understanding of care of myself and care of others has become void of the binary framing of this or that, input and output. Suddenly, care of others is care for myself. Care of myself is care for others." This quote felt so profound to me, that self-care can mean being away from others as much as it means being with others, asking for help, and even caring for someone else within your capacity. And this is just one of many examples she provides. And it makes me think about how we have so much to learn from those who, unfortunately, have to make choices and create their own family structures because they have been cast aside by their own families or marginalized by systemic racism, transphobia, fat phobia, sexism, classism, or ableism. And this brings me back to a previous point. How much are we recognizing how the workers in your organization create solidarity, especially outside traditional structures? Is this something that leaders take note of? Is it something they foster and take action for themselves? And what does it mean if maybe it's a challenge to even begin to connect or relate with this? Care at the level of leadership is critical to not just be an example, but to create legacies of care, generational care, so that generations of trauma, which can look like workplace harassment, bullying, sexism, along with and often a result of colonialism, patriarchy, and white supremacy that is embedded within organizational structures, can soften and be dismantled. I'm going to share my screen again. Speaking of leadership, I recently came across the book called Power and Love: A Theory and Practice of Social Change by Paul Kahane. And I'll be honest, there were some things I liked about it and things I didn't, but I really appreciated the premise, which is based on this MLK quote. Power, properly understood, is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites, polar opposites, so that love is identified with the resignation of power and power with the denial of love. Now, we've got to get this thing right. What we need to realize is that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. It is precisely this collision of immoral power with powerless morality which constitutes the major crisis of our time. This quote brought up so much for me. First of all, I've always hated the idea of power because I've always seen power as power over, and I hadn't seen that it can be power with, or that this power can achieve a purpose in generative ways. In fact, it requires love or unity in order to achieve a certain purpose. And I think activist movements are great ways that show how this can work and also how it can fail. This can also be seen in unions. So just to reiterate, power without unity or love can be abusive and self-aggrandizing. With unity or love, power can be used to affect change, form robust relationships, and drive innovation, purpose, and realizations. And when love is without power, it is challenging to affect change, though it engenders solidarity and vulnerability. Love with power recognizes people's differences, trauma, common struggles, and marginalizations while moving toward a purpose. I'm going to stop my share. One metaphor used in the book is that learning to use power and love is like learning to walk on two legs. Kahane says, but walking on two legs does not mean either moving them both at the same time or always being stably balanced. On the contrary, it means moving first one leg and then the other, and always being out of balance, or more precisely, always being in dynamic balance. The key to walking on two legs is that even when we are focusing on one, we must not forget the other. He continues, when our power and love are disconnected, we fall down. When our power is stronger than our love, or vice versa, we stumble dangerously. And when we are able to balance and shift between power and love so that the two phenomena become one, we walk fluidly. I was thinking about this in the context of peer support, which I mentioned earlier as one of the principles of a trauma-informed approach. I thought, isn't peer support love without power because you relate to each other on the same level? But then I realized that peer support is purposeful. It can be a mechanism to support the creation of ideas, be empowering and validating, and it can move one forward toward healing and making hard decisions by feeling less alone. This can look so many ways, depending on your organization. And I often worry that privilege forgets love, or that marginalization has to assimilate to power, or that there is a lot of stumbling that feels pulled in too many directions. And then it's hard to find a rhythm. Again, these are gaps where showing up really matters. So the big question, which I have been addressing throughout, is how do we show up and care for each other during messy times? I'm going to stop talking now and play a poem I heard on the podcast, The Slowdown, where host Ada Limon reads daily poems. This one is called Do You Ever Think About Leaving, My Mother Asks, by Angela Maria Spring. And I'm going to scroll as I play this.
Today's poem by Angela Maria Spring is about those moments when it feels like no place is safe and suffering is all around us, and still a box of light arrives and reminds us of what we have, reminds us to choose each other, to choose this moment. This is Angela Maria Spring's Do You Ever Think About Leaving, My Mother Asks, on her 70th birthday, though she does not look even 60, a blessing many Boricuas wear. And I say, where can we go? Where is better? Even now, green plantains fat in a vase above the kitchen sink, thrust up toward sky. 3 mangoes, heavy, grand on the counter. The college girl my in-laws paid at grocery shop found them amidst all this sickness. They showed up on my doorstep and I nearly cried. Held the bag over my 11-month-old. He loves mangoes the most, as much as I do, as much as his abue, whom he cannot touch. Instead, he places his tiny hands on hers on the window pane. Each time she drops off packages full of fruit empanadas, long skinny baguettes, bright yellow packets of seasoning, I slide my quarantine eat arroz con pollo and galletas between her presents, wiped clean, left outside my welcome mat. 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet, our new prayer, and a high desert front yard. Lizards scuttle through the rose bushes. The sun already pours its heat, thick like summer syrup. Soon the baby turns 1, and my mother will find a way to bake him a cake with rationed flour. And then it will be June, July with its violent rains. But where can we go? Where is better? Even now, tell me, where is the monsoon season gentle?
What I love about this poem is how beautifully it demonstrates the sadness of COVID-19, an unmet yet tender relationship between a baby and his abuela, and almost an acceptance of what can be given and received during these messy times. It shows that showing up is possible through small acts of love and powerful purpose. And it includes elements of the land in the form of fruit that connects humans to each other through culture, flavor, and intimacy. If you have returned to your workplace and want to leave fruit by your colleague's office so as to keep distance, I definitely encourage that. And I also encourage extending this metaphor of care and purpose into other ways of being. During a time when parts of the world are opening up, but COVID hasn't ended, structures are not what they were. And quote unquote, getting back to normal with protocols and anxiety is a bit hard to do. With that being said, this is a great time to attend how workers feel and prefer to connect. This means actively listening and providing choices for ways others can show up. This means setting an example for different ways to work and standing up for others when they aren't able. Can you set aside time during the day for you to tend to your body, check in with someone you usually don't, and actively understand and respond to the fact that so many BIPOC I spoke with felt safer working from home and not being on the receiving end of microaggressions, not just from patrons, but from colleagues? I don't say this as an accusation or a judgment. I see this as a personal observation that is information. I've had several conversations with BIPOC during this time. And while many have had challenges to navigate, the safety they felt working from home was a topic of discussion. This period of time has given us so much information to respond to. So as information scientists, we must drop the neutrality and show up for these differences. And I don't know if this means anti-racism committees or diversity statements as much as it means relating to others in ways that emanate compassion, slowing down, and reprioritizing people's needs first. It can look like creating accountability practices, acknowledging and acting in ways that honor Indigenous land and peoples, adjusting organizational structures to center relational needs, and perhaps rethinking knowledge organization from an Indigenous perspective. To that last point, I bring up the incredible paper by Sandra Littletree, Miranda Velarde Lewis, and Marissa Duarte titled Centering Relationality, a conceptual model to advance Indigenous knowledge organization practices. This paper describes how Indigenous knowledge has historically been in service to the state rather than toward Indigenous peoples. It also discusses the inherent colonialism in Western information institutions. It cites Cree scholar Sean Wilson's 2008, quote, conceptualization of relationality, or the acknowledgement that we all exist in relationship to each other, the natural world, ideas, the cosmos, objects, ancestors, and future generations. And furthermore, that we are accountable to those relationships. I was most struck by a passage underneath a subsection titled The Ethos of Indigenous Systems of Knowledge, Living a Good Life. Even this subsection title made me see how the ethos described about living a good life personally felt extremely disconnected in today's world. And I'm going to share the passage now. For Indigenous peoples, to live a good life is to be conscientious of the myriad sovereign agreements that allow all beings to coexist in a continuous state of creation, Watts 2013. As Indigenous peoples, through our relationships, we belong to our landscapes, places, languages, histories, ceremonies, peoples, families, nations, and clans. The responsibility of our belonging helps us live a balanced, good life. It continues, Indigenous ways of knowing are therefore based on observing and living in an Indigenous way, communicating lessons and insights by talking story, singing and teaching, doing what anthropologists call the oral tradition, and by weaving, carving, making pottery, designing and building edifices, making art, fashioning tools and weapons, growing and creating medicine, designing calendars and other measures of eras, through intentional safekeeping and curation, as well as illicit practices of archaeological and anthropological theft and black market sales, the expressions of Indigenous knowledge end up in libraries, archives, and museums as books, documents, recordings, interviews, films, and other collectible objects. To appropriately describe and provide access to these expressions, it is insufficient to care only for the object, which is the material expression of a people's way of life. Instead, the knowledge itself, including the means of its making, must be treated with respect, with a sense of responsibility toward the restoration of justice for Indigenous peoples in light of the history of colonialism, including the establishment of fair and just reciprocal relationships between the holding institutions and the Indigenous peoples who created the original expressions. I saw this as an impactful way of talking about caring for and beyond objects, and by caring for relationships themselves. And it also made me think about how we can trouble institutions to consider how relationship, or lack thereof, permeates institutions themselves, a sort of meta exercise of building responsibility toward each other through decolonization. From this perspective, I see showing up as exploring small ways we can shift toward relational thinking in knowledge organization as well as with each other. Especially as COVID-19 puts so many Indigenous elders at risk of not just getting the virus, but preventing them from passing down language and traditions that have already been erased due to settler colonialism. While none of this can happen overnight, I see so much power and love with leadership actively reflecting, exploring, and acting in this vein. In my short time as Associate Director of the Network of the National Library of Medicine, Pacific Southwest region, I better understood how there's almost a pull to be deferential to all who are above you, instead of advocating for those you lead, a very classic tension about being in middle management. I did my best to always advocate for my team, though at no fault of theirs. It was challenging due to bureaucracy and rules that I felt completely devalued relationships. It frustrated me that being the leader of a team felt more tiring than empowering because of this pull from above. This is also why I think leaders need peer support too. And even more so, this is why I think vulnerability is one way to center relational ways of being, individually and systemically. I once saw a talk with Prentice Hemphill, a group and conflict facilitator, where they said vulnerability is the key to conflict resolution. This has always stuck with me. The tricky thing about vulnerability is that in order to be vulnerable, you have to feel safe. And as a reminder, safety is the absence of threat and the presence of connection. So this is a call to explore what feels safe, what doesn't, and what we could do in order to foster safety so that relationships can thrive and vulnerability is a norm. Being vulnerable isn't making others around you responsible for your story or emotions or challenges. It is fostering trust, connection, and interdependence in a way that is based in mutuality, respect, and authenticity. Being vulnerable is a way to show up and to divest from Western ideas of professionalism and perfectionism. It's a way to take off the mask of individuality and step into the power of relationship. I know I've spoken about quite a bit here, And I hope you can take even one concept I mentioned or read one piece I cited, reflect on it, and share it with someone else. As I mentioned at the beginning, one of the thoughts I had when I saw who was opening DLF was, who am I? And after creating this, I realized that it's more about all of us seeing our power, our love, and showing up for it, even if that means we have to stumble while we are on our way. I see this all as a cycle of a process, not an end goal. I'm so inspired by the people and works I mentioned, and I'm so grateful for the labor and thoughtfulness put into this work. Here are the references for what I cited for you to review. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, for sharing how you felt in your body, or for disconnecting if that's what you needed today. I have so much gratitude and appreciation for all of you. Thank you so much.